Hello everyone! We bring you today a very special episode of Orchids in Pop Culture. Since we love everything spooky and Halloween, we decided to gather a few instances of orchids in media that are more on the sinister side. We found a lot of them, but we decided to start this year with 3. If you like this series, don't forget to share this video and give it a like, so we know to keep doing them. We also have a super thanks option open on our channel for tips. The first of the 2 stories we have for you today is The Reluctant Orchid, written by Arthur C. Clarke, one of the biggest names in science fiction. The story is very short and very much worth reading. It can be found easily online or in the book Tales from the White Heart. Our main character is called Hercules Keating, described as being less than 1.5 meters tall and having to work hard to reach 44 kilos in weight. Without a social life, but with a large collection of cacti and orchids that were sent from all over the world. He stands in sharp contrast to his most frequent visitor, and seemingly only friend, Aunt Henrietta. She is a tall cigar-smoking woman who is a skilled driver and breeds large dogs that she would take everywhere. I think everyone can agree they have equally cool hobbies. Even though Henrietta had a busy life, she would frequently visit her nephew, who she was fond of and treated kindly. Hercules, however, due to his inferiority complex, despised his aunt. This hate for her was even bigger than his love of orchids. But his fear and cowardice translated the hate to politeness whenever she was around. This hate was a dominant emotion in his life, exceeding even his love for orchids. But he was careful not to show it, realizing that if Aunt Henrietta ever discovered how he truly felt about her, she would probably break him in 2 and throw the halves to her wolf pack. This would soon change, and the catalyst was about to arrive, in the form of a dormant orchid from somewhere in the Amazon region. It was redolent of decay, and there was the faintest hint of a rank carrion smell. Hercules was not even sure if it was viable, and told the dealer as much. Perhaps this enabled him to purchase it for a trifling sum, and he carried it home without much enthusiasm. It took a month for the orchid to start developing. But when it did, the growth was very fast. Soon, the fist-sized root ball had turned into a plant taller than its owner, and had 8 dangling tendrils that would move every time Hercules got close to it. Well, in our opinion, a month of waiting is nothing to complain about. The long tendrils and fast growth aren't very normal, and yet it feels strangely familiar, almost like we read about it somewhere. Either way, there's nothing easily identifiable in this fictional orchid's description. The only thing we can imagine with a tall, vining orchid with tendrils is something resembling a vanilla. I'm sure the use of orchid for these types of stories is less inspired by the plants themselves and more about how foreign and exotic they were at the time. After a research trip to the library, Hercules stumbles across a short story about a certain strange orchid and its blooms. If you remember, we made a video about that same H.G. Wells story a while ago, so don't forget to check it out. In it we talk a lot more about the orchid hobby in Victorian times and how it inspired horror stories such as this one. Hercules seems to, apart from the stupefying odor, have found the exact same species as the one mentioned in the tale. and so he decides to feed the orchid meat. Seems weird to take fiction as a care guide, but who hasn't taken a fishy website's advice when there's nothing else available? The meat worked wonders, and soon the orchid was 6 feet tall with a very healthy appetite. So, of course, Hercules developed a fear of it. Hercules' orchid seems more intelligent, or at least more expressive than the one in Wells' story. This one enjoys food and even makes sounds. It was obvious that the orchid had a very highly developed nervous system, and something very nearly approaching intelligence. It knew when it was going to be fed, and exhibited unmistakable signs of pleasure. Most fantastic of all, although Hercules was still not sure about this, it seemed capable of producing sounds. There were times just before a meal when he fancied he could hear an incredibly high-pitched whistle, skirting the edge of audibility. For months, Hercules fed and studied the orchid, always keeping it a secret. Which wasn't hard. After all, he only had one visitor, and she didn't care for orchids. Speaking of Aunt Henrietta, it was one day after a particularly taxing visit from her that a murderous plan formed in Hercules' mind. A plan that would rid him of that aunt that for years made him feel even more insecure. For 2 weeks, Hercules starved the poor plant in hopes of making it so desperate it would attack and eat anyone who would approach it, even if that someone was 6 feet tall and smelled of cigars. During the same time Hercules was starving the orchid, he was feeding his aunt kindness, attention, cakes, and tea. During those 2 weeks, he was the perfect nephew. Until finally, one Sunday, Hercules tells his aunt of a surprise he had planned for her. So one Sunday, when he carried the teacups back into the kitchen and was sitting upwind of Aunt Henrietta's cigar, he said casually, "I've got something I'd like to show you, Auntie. I've been keeping it as a surprise. It'll tickle you to death." That, he thought, was not a completely accurate description, but it gave the general idea. The starving orchid and Henrietta finally meet, and the orchid, desperate for food, takes one look at Aunt Henrietta and braces itself in pure terror. It was a full 5 seconds before the orchid moved. Then the dangling tentacles flashed into action. Not in the way that Hercules had expected. The plant clutched them tightly, protectively around itself, and at the same time it gave a high-pitched scream of pure terror. In a moment of sickening disillusionment, Hercules realized the awful truth. His orchid was an utter coward. It might be able to cope with the wildlife of the Amazon jungle, but coming suddenly upon Auntie Henrietta had completely broken its nerve. Aunt Henrietta, however, was not afraid. She was mad. We see a new side of her, one who worries for the orchid and accuses Hercules of mistreating it. She spun around on her heels and pointed an accusing finger at her nephew. "Hercules!" she roared. "The poor thing's scared to death! Have you been bullying it?" Hercules could only stand with his head hanging low in shame and frustration. "No, Auntie," he quavered. "I guess it's naturally nervous." "Well, I'm used to animals. You should have called me before. You must treat them firmly, but gently. Kindness always works, as long as you show you're the master." Henrietta consoles the orchid, shows it kindness and love. There, Diddums, don't be frightened of Auntie, she won't hurt you. It was, thought Hercules in his blank despair, a revolting sight. With surprising gentleness, Aunt Henrietta fussed over the plant beast, patting and stroking it until the tentacles relaxed, and a shrill whistling scream died away. After a few minutes of this pampering, it appeared to get over its fright. Hercules finally fled with a muffled sob, when one of the tentacles shyly crept forward and began to stroke Henrietta's gnarled fingers. Soon, she has a new pet that loves her, and one that she visits almost daily to the desperation of her nephew. So it's a happy ending, at least for the orchid and Henrietta. As for Hercules, he sulks in the corner, almost like a desperate, harmless, common plant that no one cares about.
We wanted to reference in this video at least one spooky movie, so it had to be Silence of the Lambs. In case you've never seen it, Silence of the Lambs is a horror thriller from 1991, adapted from the Thomas Harris novel. The movie tells the story of a young FBI trainee, Clarice Starling, that gets recruited to interview famed serial killer Hannibal Lecter, in hopes of getting his assistance in capturing another serial killer named Buffalo Bill. This is a movie full of little references and symbolisms. I'm sure we've all heard about the liver with fava beans and Chianti line, and its hidden meaning. And our orchid reference for this video is equally obscure. When Clarice meets with the head of the psychiatric hospital holding Hannibal Lecter, she can be seen standing in his office awkwardly while he talks to her about what a psychopathic monster Hannibal Lecter is. In the background to her right side, you have a beautiful display of orchids. Not just Phalaenopsis as well, there's at least a small Vanda hybrid and a red cattleya as well. They are all neatly displayed in orchid wood baskets and impeccably lit. And the significance of these orchids that are only on the background of one scene briefly? Well, the name orchid comes from the ancient Greek word for testicle. Clarice is also framed to her left side by a painting of 4 men that seem to be staring at her while she stands there. And in this scene, the hospital director is both dismissive with Clarice due to her gender, but also incredibly inappropriate with her. And that is one of the themes throughout the movie. Because of being a young, attractive woman in a male-dominated field, Clarice is not treated very well by the men that surround her. This is, of course, not only social criticism to a very misogynistic society, but plays very nicely in contrast with her relationship with the psychopath Hannibal Lecter that seems to find her fascinating and to a certain extent even respect her. Have you ever seen Silence of the Lambs before? And did you notice the orchids in the background? I noticed them the first time I watched it, but I had no idea about the hidden meaning. Funnily enough, there was a fashion show recently where designer Allina Liu used orchids in her designs in different ways, including being inspired by the Silence of the Lambs poster. But instead of a moth covering the mouth, the models wore orchids covering their lips. Well, they are Phalaenopsis and they're also known as moth orchids. Isn't that interesting? The collection was also very inspired by the movie Secretary, a movie that has some orchid references as well, but we haven't yet done a video about it, because it's not exactly safe for work, if you know what I mean. We have a bunch more Halloween-themed stories and movies we want to do next year. So if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to let us know in the comments and like the video, because YouTube does not seem to like it when we make these. We'll see you again next week. Goodbye.